just voted for the first time in person. Not for the first time, period. The first time in person. First time voting in person. It was a little bit of an interesting experience, to say the least. But I wanted to talk about voter security, integrity, whatever it is. This conversation that's been going on online about, voting without ID and blah, 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 and Democrats trying to steal elections and blah, blah, blah. So I'm a nonpartisan, independent, non-affiliated, never been affiliated with either party. I probably never will be, especially the Republican Party. And I look at things from an aggressive and objective standpoint. So, for example, the contrast with the way I look at things versus the way a lot of other folks look at things, especially people in partisan media, is, you tend to focus on being suspicious about things that go against your narrative. And then things that go with your narrative, all of a sudden you drop your guard and you're all comfortable. So if I'm a right winger, I'm going to focus on everything to show that this election process is bogus and blah, 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 blah. Democrats were stealing stuff and then voter ID, no ID, that's crazy. So I went in there with an attitude of, I am not friends with these people. I'm not friends with the people who support the way they do things and say that voter ID makes sense or whatever. I'm not on their team. So I didn't go in there trying to show how it's all safe and everything's fine and there's nothing to worry about. And I didn't go in there with the opposite mode of trying to expose what's really going on in shenanigans. I went there objectively. Like, imagine that I was some kind of independent contractor or whatever doing an audit on their process. And that's the mindset that I had. Is this secure? Do I have any concerns? So here's the result. Basically, I do have some concerns, but the propaganda thing is you start with an ounce of truth and then you spread that out to be a mile of lies and misinformation and things that are misleading. So the first thing is I went in there to vote, and the ballot is huge, by the way. It's like, I think it's actually longer than I can show on camera. I mean, that thing was pretty big, and it's in a little folder, I guess, for privacy and everything. I instantly got the impression that the people there, no disrespect to them, I don't have a lot of confidence in their training or their abilities in general. Like for example, I asked some basic questions, and you would think, especially with all the nonsense that's been happening and all the rhetoric about stolen elections and things like that, that they would be more prepared and ready to address questions, but that didn't seem to be the case. So if I were to simplify it, it's just like you hire a bunch of people and you just kind of tell them, hey, just tell the people to go in that booth over there and then tell them to go over to the machine. So just a kind of a more loose sort of a thing, as opposed to these people being professionals that are, think about, and I hate to use this analogy, but it's best I can come up with on the fly. Think about a police officer on the side of the road who, they're paying attention to little details. They look at your car. Do you have a registration sticker on it? Do you have the license plate in the right place? All these different things. And then even in talking to them, you know, they're listening to what you're saying, and in my opinion, they're almost like trying to set you up. But they are. You do feel on guard because you feel like you're being evaluated, and you know there's a sort of a meticulous nature to the way things are going. Here it was more laid back. Hey guys, yeah, go over there. So what does that amount to? Well, let's first of all start out with the problem that I had, and consider this is the first time I'm ever voting in person. So one of the first things I noticed is you walk in the room, there's a bunch of people sitting at a table. I don't know what to do. I've never done this before, right? You walk in a room and the person at the door says, go to the next table. There's like no one in there, by the way. When I say no one, I mean like it wasn't like a line of people or whatever. So the lady in front of me walks up to the table in front of me, like the lady said, but then for some reason she walks away and goes to another table. So I see her doing that, so I assume there's a problem at that table or something. I don't know. Maybe I should have asked or whatever, but I did what I was told. They directed her to the first table and me to go to the next. She goes to the first table, then walks away. So then I end up going around her to go even further down. So that right off the bat, I just like, I don't know what that was about. But that's minor, but just my first impression. Then I was curious to know about security in terms of how do they know who's voting? That was one of the first things I was thinking about, right? Because I heard all this rhetoric about no ID. How can you be voting without ID? So I wanted to see, would they ask for ID? Because I know that there's places that don't ask, but I don't know if that's the case here. So the case is that they don't ask for ID. They asked me for my name, and they looked up my name in the system, and they had some trouble finding my name, but then they did find it. Then they asked me for my age. I gave them another age, my birth date. I gave them the birth date. So that's basically all I had to do to confirm that I am who I say I am. So I could have been my brother. I don't have a brother, but I could have been my brother. I could have been anyone that knows my age. I'm sorry, not my age. That's not enough. You need to know my birth date. Anyone that knows my birth date and perhaps appears to be a man could have voted today. That was pretty clear. But again, because I'm not a partisan trying to push a particular narrative, I don't just stop right there. If I want to push a right-wing narrative, I end it right there. This is ridiculous. How could you be voting without ID? That's stupid. But they do require me to sign. So you do have a process of signature verification. But the question then would be, and I guess I know the answer already, because I was like, why would they be checking the signature? I guess that's part of the. They have a process that they'll go through to make sure all the votes are valid. They don't just like you vote and then that's it. They gotta make sure that whoever said they voted actually voted, right? So that means that some part of the process they're gonna check that signature versus what I have on file. The problem is that that's probably going to fail if they do it well. So it'll be interesting to know if my ballot actually gets processed. And I'm going to tell you why. And this is the first example of what I'm saying in terms of the competence level of the people there. So the pen that you use to sign with, it's like a stylus, and I guess the tip was worn out. So when I was trying to sign, it was kind of like, imagine trying to sign with an eraser for a pencil. So obviously it's going to be very abrupt, and you're not going to make smooth strokes. And basically the signature that I did was the equivalent of sometimes when you go to the store and you sign for your credit card, and you know, it's just I don't know, it's just not the same type of signature that maybe you do on paper or whatever it is. But this is even worse because this pen was like it's a lot of friction. So it's very like, it's all over the place. So I don't see how anyone would look at that and say that my signature is correct. So in theory, my ballot, you know, would be thrown out or should be thrown out. I don't know what the procedure is. Do they contact me and tell me, hey, something's wrong with this, you have to come in? I definitely know that Republicans would definitely try to remove my vote, playing their little games based on like, oh, this, that. But even though they are playing games, the fact of the matter is, the whole point of the signature verification is to make sure that the right person voted, right? So the fact that my signature was bad means that they should throw out my vote, right? But my point is that they are using this as a strategy to basically manipulate the election. So that incident that I'm describing would be a valid reason, but they will stretch things as far as they can to eliminate as many ballots as they can, and especially targeting people that didn't vote the way they want to. That's one of the big strategies, trying to eliminate voter rolls and things like that. But regardless, I went there, I did a signature. The signature was a bad signature because the thing was messed up. I pointed it out to them. The first sign of a competence issue is they didn't immediately say, oh, let's get you another stylus, or let me have you do it again. Like, that's like basic, right? The signature, like if they have training, they did have training, but if the training was good, then they would know that the signature is a critical part of the process. So any complaints about the pen is not working properly should be taken very seriously, and it's kind of like, oh, we got to do it over, but they're just kind of like, oh, it's fine. So that was a problem right there. So in this particular case, would it have been better if I presented an ID? I would have to say yes, because although you can get a fake ID or whatever, that's a little bit more tricky and difficult. But this particular scenario would be eliminated by me simply presenting an ID. Now, are there valid arguments to why you shouldn't require ID, or they choose not to require ID? Absolutely. Do those arguments get challenged in good faith by the folks talking about, you know, oh, this is stupid? No, right? There's not a good faith discussion about it. It's just kind of like, oh, this is stupid, how could you go with ID, without addressing the reasons why they're doing it in any serious way. But I would say that was a failure on their part. Not that they're not doing ID, but if you're not going to do ID and you're doing a different process, then you need to make sure that process is being done in a thorough and precise way, which was not the case here, right? So what that means is, if the other part of the process is working well, which is the signature verification, a lot of people's ballots will get tossed because the signatures don't match, because the pen was broken, and multiple people were aware of this and did nothing. There was somebody who was more senior, perhaps seemed to be more knowledgeable, that I spoke to. I had some questions about how the voting process works. And even that person, he was very nice, and he was like, let me show you, blah, blah, blah. And he walked me over to another booth and showed me somebody's signature, and her signature was perfect. And I pointed out that it's probably because that pen is not broken. And then he walked over to the one that I used and confirmed that he was like, oh, the tip is messed up. But still, at that point now, 3 people are aware of this, and still no one says, hey, sign again. Let's get a new pen and sign again. So that's the kind of people that they've recruited. I don't know how they vet these people in terms of their competence level, comprehension, or whatever it is, but it's the quality of the people there, no disrespect to them, is definitely not very high, because 3 people seeing this and no one's thinking like, signature's a big deal, let's make sure no one thought about that, right? The other thing was, when I was trying to explain this to them, I was asking questions about like, how do they know that I voted? The guy says all the information's on the computer. And I said, okay, that's fine, that information's on the computer, but I could be anybody. And he didn't understand the point I was making. He just keeps saying, it's on the computer, we have your birth date, and we have this and that. And I'm like, how does that tell you who it is, who I am? Like, I could be, and I said it multiple times, I could be anyone. And they just were unable to comprehend what I was even saying. They just kept repeating that it's on the computer, it's on the computer, it's on the computer. Then they talked about the signature, and then I was like, but the signature is not good because of the pen, and it just really didn't go anywhere. So they definitely need to vet these people better. They definitely need to train these people better. But ultimately, can you stretch this and go to like, oh, this is how they steal an election and stuff? Nope. Because even with everything I just described, for you to really move elections, the stuff that you would be required is kind of ridiculous. You could get away with it. It's not a perfect system, but you're not going to go far. So what are we going to do? We're going to get 500 Mexicans, right? And we're going to all tell them a birth date. So first of all, we're going to steal data. We're going to steal a bunch of birth dates and names, right? For people who are registered to vote here. So somehow we need to get this information. We need to find out who are registered voters in this area and get a list of all their names. Then we need to find out what their birth dates are, right? Then we need to get a bunch of random Mexicans to come in and say the right name and say the right birth date, and then they'll be allowed to vote based on that. But if the registered voter votes, they're going to have 2 votes for the same person, so part of their process is going to pick up on we have duplicate votes. So now we need to figure out which is the valid one, which is the invalid one. Now, I think even with that messed up pen, unless the person has a copy of my signature, my messed up pen signature is probably going to be closer to mine than theirs. And also there's simple things you can do, like asking me when I voted and stuff like that. They can review the cameras. And there's a lot of ways that you can easily sort out who's who. So this will be a really, really unsophisticated, sloppy, and inefficient way to move an election, is to have a bunch of random people show up with the, like, it's just getting the data. I mean, I'm not saying you can't get it, but that's already has challenges. Knowing who's registered but's not going to vote, so you don't end up with duplicate votes. Like, I don't know how you figure that out, right? Because any one of these names you use, if they vote as well, it's going to be flagged as 2 votes. So it's like, boom, there's a problem here. Like, how do you come in and use my name and my birth date and vote, and then I vote, and then somehow, like, no one notices? Like, that's not a thing. Now, as a right-wing media guy, I wouldn't mention this. I wouldn't go this far. I would just be like, oh, it's stupid, and why do they need to have ID? But instead, because I live in objective reality, I give you a nuanced evaluation. I point out that, yes, in fact, an ID would have helped, especially in this specific process, because I had a unique thing that happened with the pen not working or whatever. But I'm also pointing out that the process that they use will address an overwhelming majority of attempts to do fraud. Like, again, there's always going to be fraud. There's always been fraud. But the question is, enough to move the results, right? And if you have an election that's really tight, somebody wins by like 2 votes or 3 votes, then yes, obviously, just a few people doing this and getting away with it could mess with it. But the problem with that logic is that if you have thousands of people vote, right, legit, except for 3, I mean, that's not something avoidable, right? You cannot have everyone vote and there's no problems, no one did any shenanigans. That's always going to be the case. So the reason that there's an issue is not because they didn't check ID, right? Because if they did check ID, then the few people would be the ones with the fake IDs that somehow slipped through, right? You know what I mean? Like, there's always going to be a small amount of people that are gonna commit fraud and get through, right? The point is, are you gonna have any systematic amount that's gonna move elections? That's what we need to be concerned with, right? Because the other one is no use focusing on that. You focus on making things as secure as possible, right? And then you have the understanding that there's going to be sometimes things that get through. So as long as there's no way to really, like, hundreds of votes or thousands of votes getting through that are fraudulent, then we're doing things the right way. Can we improve things? Yes, and we should. We should always be improving things, making things better. But it sucks that there's people that are being disingenuous online, that are trying to mislead people and playing games and all this kind of stuff. And it's a sad state of affairs. But anyway, that was my voting experience. I will give you an update in this video in the future whether my vote goes through or not, because in my view, I think they should toss my ballot, because the signature, I don't see how that signature would match, right? The other thing was that there was a proposal on the back, and it's my first time. So that's another thing. So, you know, I'm not like 100 years old or anything. I'm not 20 either. But I wasn't clear on some things, and they didn't make it clear to me. So I'm just wondering, like, older voters coming in and being confused. So, for example, I'm just absent-mindedly, and I haven't done this. I haven't done any like SAT test stuff where you circling the whatever. I haven't done that in a long time. So just instinctually, just based on what I do in my life now, I'm not bubbling in things. Like that's something from school, right? So when I do stuff, I do like check marks or an X or whatever. So that's what I did. I literally, on the proposal, I did a check mark. And then I was like, wait a minute, shouldn't I be circling it in? Now, I'm going to hope that somewhere on that form, it clearly stated that you should circle it in, and maybe I didn't read it or whatever, but I'm just saying, like, if I made that mistake, I can't imagine that a bunch of, especially like seniors and stuff, go in there and they don't fill it in properly. Now the thing with that is the machine, I guess, if they don't do it properly, the machine would reject it and say it's not good. In theory, I think it definitely would be able to tell whether it's circled in properly. I think they can scan for marks outside of the box. But this particular machine, which I wish I looked at the brand of it, did not seem to care that I made a pretty big check mark on that circle. So there was significant amount of, and it was like a pen they have us using. There's a significant amount of ink outside of the circle. And apparently that was not a concern because it accepted my ballot. So anyway, I'm curious to know what's going to happen. I will follow up and let you guys know. So the process definitely needs improvement for sure. But it still doesn't match the rhetoric from those online talking about stolen elections and whatever nonsense. Imagine that. We could actually look at something and find some legitimate flaws with it while also pointing out the legitimate positives about it and what's actually working, and have a nuanced view rather than a partisan one. Strange how that works. All right, guys.